everyone, and welcome back to another episode on Two Puerto Ricans and a Black Girl. Today, in keeping up with the Black History theme, we are going to touch on a topic that might be a little offensive. Some might find a little offensive, or some may not feel comfortable discussing. But as women of color and the times that we're living in, we thought that it was necessary to talk about it. So today we do have a guest speaker. His name is Jason Bost. I am the Dope Widow.
Hey guys, I am the Love Guru.
And I am Mimi, your lifestyle diva, and welcome to this episode. This is a good one for us, talking on colorism.
Yes, it is.
I'm very excited to talk about this because in the times that we live now, we are so affected still by it, which is so unfortunate. Ready to dig right in and bring our guests in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so give me a second. Hey, Jason.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. How are you today?
I'm warm and I'm inside, so I can't complain.
Right. Well, let me say this first, because today is Super Bowl Sunday. So
It is.
thank you as a man for allowing us to take some of your time.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. It all worked out. See, that's my excuse. So if you see me sipping on something, that's the excuse because it is Super Bowl Sunday.
Super Bowl Sunday.
Well, that's what we do over here. We sip and coffee.
That's what it is. That's what it is. How are you ladies doing?
We're good. We're excited to just really delve into this book of yours.
So now that Gigi said that, so tell the people your name, who you are, and the name of your book.
Sure. So my name is Jason Bost, B-O-S-T. It's the name of my book is White Nig. I actually have a second copy of the book that's going to be released in the next 3 or 4 months under another title. I'm not going to release the title yet.
Okay.
That's part of the our marketing process as we roll it out, but it'll be the same book but another title. And the subtitle of the book is the triumphs, the struggles and triumphs growing up biracial in America. So the subtitle will be the same for the new edition as well, but the initial title will be a little bit different.
Can you tell everyone where they can find your book if they would like to order it?
Yeah, it can be found pretty much everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I think there's still a few autograph copies left via my website at jasonbost.com. But if you search it up, it'll pop up. Amazon is usually the most popular platform because of their delivery options, and you'll get it in within 2 days. But I still have quite a few people that order the book through my website if they're trying to get an autograph copy. So any of those platforms will work.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
So we always start out the show with a question, and my question for you is, how does a biracial child growing up in the 70s and 80s get kicked out of high school dropout, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Was dibbling and dabbling in the drug game, go from that to MBA to a lawyer who's working with all these great entertainers and stuff like that. How did you make that transition to who the man that you are now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the whole book.
Yes.
That's what the story is really about. It's
Uh-huh.
about my journey. Say it again.
I said, so drop us just a little carrot. Give us a little insight.
So I wanted to, I was hoping to try to, provide some hope to some people out there, something that I didn't really have access to when I was growing up. I didn't know what the capabilities were and what I could do. Everyone always told you what you can't do. You can't do this, you can't accomplish this. We already knew all the odds that were stacked against us as we were growing up, but no one really opened the doors and said, hey, these are things that you can do. I wanted to tell my story from that perspective and make sure that people understood that even if you made some poor choices, or if you grew up or you were born into a certain situation, that doesn't mean that you're destined to be less than what you could become. So I just kind of wanted to take people through that journey. I think initially when I started to write the book that I felt like race and race being biracial played a much larger role in what I was experiencing than what it actually did. In retrospect, I found out that most of my peers they never even really viewed me as being biracial. When I told them I was writing a book and I'm interviewing them, hey, I'm writing this book, and I told them the title of the book, and they're like, well, why are you calling it that? And I said, well, I'm biracial. And they're like, I never thought about you like that. And I said, listen, you came to my house. You slept over at my house. You met my mother. My mother is white. You know my father. So they say, yeah, but I still never thought about you that way. So
Yeah.
I think that I was probably hypersensitive to it because of the few incidents that I did have where it was pinpointed. But that was it's written through the lens of growing up biracial in this country.
Mhm.
And as you said, it takes you from my journey of being born in the 70s and growing up during that time frame to moving into an urban environment from a suburban and a rural environment, going from a predominantly white neighborhood into a predominantly Black neighborhood and school district, and just the kind of the culture shock that took place during that time, and then getting involved with making some poor choices early on, and getting involved with some situations that many of us find ourselves involved with at that age, dropping out of high school, becoming a teenage father, being arrested, and eventually being charged with a felony and convicted of a felony for drugs and for selling drugs, and then having to find my way back into society and fight my way back into the position that I'm in right now. And it took 20 years to get here, and it was a long, hard fight. But it was a fight, and I accomplished it nonetheless.
Wow.
Let me ask you a question. Since you mentioned schooling and education, as an educator myself, I would like to know, what role does colorism play in education or in schooling?
Wow, that's a huge question. I'm an educator myself as well. I'm a college professor. I have been for the last 8 years. So it's a slightly different perspective. When I initially went to school, I went to school because I wanted to teach. That's what I thought that I was going to be able to do. But during that process, I found out, actually, I think it was right after my first year or my second year in the process, that I wouldn't be able to secure a job as a teacher because I had the felony conviction. So I know that when I was growing up, and I don't think much has changed now with the demographics of the teachers in urban schools. There were very few teachers that came from where I came from. There were a couple that looked like me, but they didn't really come from where I came from. So there was a disconnect between myself and between them in terms of trying to build a relationship and them understanding what I was going through. And I think that that's still something that persists to this day. It's phenomenal when I see individuals that want to dedicate themselves to teaching, and they take these positions within these schools, but I just don't feel like many of them are equipped to handle what they're going to come up against because they just don't understand the cultures that they're dealing with.
Right.
And it still exists today.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I agree.
100%.
Actually leads me to in reading some of your chapters, one part kind of stood out to me, and that was when you mentioned that the world is made up of perceived inferior and superior people, right? And we're certainly now currently living in a climate that's kind of reverted back to that. Well, it's not reverted, it's actually just the climate is made comfortable so that people can now kind of have all this racist rhetoric taking place. What's your thoughts on the state of the climate today in regards to that statement, how you thought of this statement about the world being, looking at us inferior and superior. What do you think about that now? Hello.
I mean, again, you guys are asking very deep questions that cover a lot. We're in a strange place. I mean, we've been in a strange place for the past 4 or 5 years. I think that I always try to look at things from an optimist standpoint whenever possible. And one of the things that I said from looking at the political climate in this country, one of the benefits of having a president like we just had and going through the situations that we just had is that it's a in your face reminder that even though things have changed, things really haven't changed, and even though some of the numbers look better and things look good on paper, or they look better on paper, at the end of the day, not much has really changed. The only thing that's changed is time, and we're in a time frame of more political correctness. So it's everything is still there. It's just kind of been buried under the rug. And now we're forced to kind of deal with that again, which I think is fantastic. We need to deal with these things head on and have conversations. So one thing that's happened recently is that we have started to talk about these things again. When President Obama was in office, the narrative was, oh, well, there's a Black man in office, so everything must be okay.
Right.
You know, there's all of the stuff that you said was holding you back is no longer holding you back anymore. And we all know that that's not the case, and that wasn't the case. But that's kind of the narrative that was spun at that time. Now we're in a more realistic standpoint in terms of having that conversation and what's going on. And I've said this throughout the last 5 years. We are living in history. This is a time when people are going to look back at this particular period in history and say, wow, you know, I ask my grandfather these type of questions all the time. He's 97 years old. I ask him questions about, and he's very sharp. He's got all of it. Everything is very, very much together. He's probably sharper than I am mentally. But I ask him questions about what he experienced when he was growing up and what he saw, because, you know, there's certain times in history that interest me, the civil rights movement. And right now, every time I had those conversations with him recently, he would always circle back to what's going on right now and say, I've never experienced anything like this before. I've never seen anything like this before. So that was a reminder to me that we are living in the moment right now. And this is, you know, what can we do right now to impact what's happening right now? And I think one of the things that we can do is have conversations like this where we talk about it, we put it out there. You know, we have conversations, we have dialogue, not just between us, but between people that don't look like us and don't think like us as well.
Exactly.
And that just doesn't happen enough.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said all that about our last president that we just had. That we.
Isn't it funny how none of us want to say his name?
Oh, I never say it. I never say that name.
Never.
You know, he made us. He made you have these conversations, and it was actually a blessing because it brought things to a head. So that you can hold people accountable for their actions and things like that. Like I just did a post and it disturbed me when I tell you to my soul, when I saw it was a young man, it escapes me his name, but years and years ago, he was executed, the youngest person ever executed, 14 years old.
Wow.
They were saying that he killed 2 white girls. And come to find out later that he did not do it. But the fact that this is what this country is built on, that's the soul of this country. And until America atones for things like that, it's never going to be any rectification, you know, between Black people. If they don't stand up and say, we were wrong for doing this, we were at fault for doing this. You know what I'm saying? So people have to make amends and give apologies and stand up and say what they did wrong. And that's what this country is still not doing. And I think once they do that and say that, yeah, we did all these things, we were wrong.
Acknowledgement.
The acknowledgement of it. So, but we just totally living in a new era now, I think. Like people that where we were before, like people looking for 2019, we're never going back to that place. This is a new chapter, a new era. And we just have to move from here and continue to have these dialogues that we're having.
It's funny you say that. I think we're all in today because that leads me to my next question. And my question is, Jason, who do you think is, or ladies, who do you think is responsible for breaking the cycle of colorism today? Like, who do you think is responsible? You said all of that, Mimi, but like, who do we deem responsible for breaking the cycle? Is it us?
Yeah, when we're talking about responsibility, I always look inward first, because it's easy to point the finger and say that somebody else is supposed to facilitate change, but really, a change starts within. So it starts with each one of us and the steps that we take and how we interact with people on a daily basis. I always encourage people I haven't done a book discussion in a while because of COVID. But one of the things that I ask is look at your social media pages and look at who your circle is on social media. If everyone that you have in your circle looks like you and thinks like you are part of the problem. You have to step outside of that bubble and you have to interact with people that are outside of your circle. So and I always encourage people, listen, right now, go befriend, and I put that in quotation marks, but I use a Facebook term, go friend someone that looks different than you, that thinks politically the opposite of you, a couple of people, and keep them in your circle. When they say something that you don't agree with, don't cancel them and delete them. You know, maybe you sit back, maybe you don't comment on that particular aspect. But when they post something that you can relate to, you comment on that. If they say, my daughter graduated today, I'm so happy. Congratulations on your daughter's graduation. That's a similarity that we have. Focus on those things. And what I found is that by doing that, it's done a number of things for me. Number one, it's kept me in touch with how people that don't think like me think. It's kept me in touch with what things are important to them and some of the reasons why they're important to them. So it's kind of added a human touch to what they're thinking and feeling. And it's helped me develop empathy for their situations. And I think that the reverse is true as well, because they were forced to look at me as something that they haven't looked at before. They might not have had a person of color that was a friend. They might not have had a liberal, even though I don't consider myself as such, or a Democrat, and I don't consider myself to be that either, in their circle before. So to have that and to see that, hey, wait a minute, this person is funny, he's articulate, you know, he has kids, he's a great grandfather, he eats food, he does the things that we do. To find those things that we tend to think don't exist on the other side is really important. So I think one of the first things that we can do is start to reach out to people that aren't like us, reach out to people that are on the other side and start to build those bridges. Communication is how we kind of heal and move forward and go over this. It's not by yelling at somebody, you're wrong and I'm right. You don't want to hear that. The only thing that you're going to do is shut down, or it's going to lead to more arguments. So we have to be bigger people and kind of take a higher intellect approach to this. And in doing so, we can effectuate change right now with our own generation.
That's right. I agree with that 100%. Humanizing people is the key, because like you said, sometimes some people don't know a Black woman. Some people don't know any Puerto Rican women. They've never experienced those cultures before. So only thing that they know is the derogatory images that they see on TV and on social media. So we need to allow them to, see that everybody does not do all of these things that they're saying on TV and on social media. So that was a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and address the stereotypes. Like we have questions. I think that one of the benefits had growing up biracial was that I grew up in two different worlds. I have an understanding of opposing cultures from an insider's perspective. So the stereotypes that are associated with white folks, for example, I made this joke once at a book event I was doing. It was all white folks, and nobody got the joke. They all just kind of looked at each other like, "What's he talking about?" But I said, it's kind of like with white folks, there's no real seasoning in the food. It's just kind of bland. And they kind of just looked at each other like, what is he talking about? So, but those are the things that people have always been comfortable coming to me with, because I make fun of them and I'm open about them. So I've had friends that'll come to me and ask me questions. Hey, why do Black folks do this? Stereotypical questions. And instead of being offended, I'll sit down and break it down, or we'll talk about culture, or we'll talk about food. And I have a little bit different perspective because I studied history. I have a undergraduate degree in history, and I'm a history buff. So I can get into the history of soul food and where it came from, and the tie-ins to slavery. And, we have those discussions, and it opens their mind, and I see the light bulbs go off. And then I'll come back and I'll ask them a question, like, hey, listen, I know that this is stereotypical, but again, this is what the conversations that we have. One of my good friends who is Chinese, I'll say, listen, I got to ask you, why can't Asian people drive? So that, but it's a stereotype. We all know it's a stereotype, but it'll open dialogue. And instead of somebody being offended and say, what do you mean? We laugh and we talk about it, and we get into the root of that, and it helps to understand cultures and differences. And we're not all the same. We have to stop pretending like we're all the same. The
Mm.
same. We're not. There's different things that we like. We like to eat different things. We like to listen to different music. We like to go different places and dress different ways. We should embrace those differences and try to understand them, as opposed to trying to pretend like, you know, we're colorblind. I hate that term, colorblind.
Mhm.
Right.
We have to embrace those things, and I think that we need to do more of that.
I think it's funny you mentioned you're a history buff, and I wanted to, in reading a little bit, it made me get the feel of like a modern day type of history book, because the way you write, just the rawness and the use of words really just paints this picture.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, wow, this would be amazing book to have to discuss colorism, to discuss races in a college setting for a Black and or Hispanic type of cultural studies. Have you ever thought about maybe using this book? Because I think it would be so eye-opening.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm putting it out under a new title. I was approached by a number of school districts who were interested in utilizing the book in their programs, but I don't know if any of you have children that are high school or junior high school, or if you think back to yourself when they sent out this book list. These are the books that we're going to read this semester or this year. And sometimes there's controversy when certain books like Tom's, or was it
Right. Tom Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer,
Yeah.
when that book comes out, you know, oh my God, I don't want my kids reading this because it says the word nigger multiple times in there. So imagine being a parent and you get the book list and you're looking through the book and you see white nigger on there. You're gonna lose. Black parents are gonna lose it. White parents are gonna lose it because they don't understand. You know, we judge before we understand. It's judging a book by the cover.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that I'm doing now is I'm rebranding and I'm putting the book out under a different name to try to jump over that hurdle, which was the biggest hurdle that I faced in that situation.
Okay.
In the academic setting, I think that there's less of a pushback, but that's something that I've seen in academia as well, in higher education. Once that's been accomplished, then I'll be able to rebrand and reintroduce the book to those particular marketplaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's the potential for that happening. And that's the only reason that I'm doing that is because I was approached by so many school districts about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that it was just not realistic to think that the book would be accepted in those school districts by parents. It's just not, it's not a realistic thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people on both sides of the fence, Black folks, white folks, you name it, come and say, well, why, I want to buy your book, but I'm not comfortable, you know, with somebody seeing me reading this book. And then the opposite of that is I have plenty of friends who are like, I can't wait to read this book on the subway and put it up in people's faces. So there's the two sides of the fence. So I think that what I've done is come up with a compromise with the new title. Now the new title is something that I've always planned to do before I even released the book. It was, I knew that there would be issues associated with this, but I felt that it was important to put the title out in the original context because of the way what it felt to me and what it meant to me, as well as who I was trying to attract with the initial publishing of the book, which was people that are incarcerated, people that might not necessarily read a book. I wanted them to pick up a book, and I felt like this was a way to get their attention and to accomplish that.
And the read is great. I mean, like I said, just the use of words and how you just make everything, it's so raw, and how you paint the picture. It's a great read. It's an easy read. I can see the younger kids breaking it down, and definitely older people in our age demographic just being able to read through it and connecting and creating these conversations, because this is the world that we're living in now.
I really appreciate that. And I think that was one of the things that I was really worried about with writing the book. I knew I had a great story. You know, there were times in my life, throughout my life, where I remember in the moment saying, damn, this is some movie shit. You know what I mean? Like, I can't believe I just made it through that. This is crazy. I can see this on the big screen. So I knew I had a good story, but I was worried about how I was going to deliver it from a writing standpoint. This is my first book. I never wrote a book before.
It's great.
Thank you. I was really worried about that. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, people could relate to it and digest it. And I kind of look at my book as being a trilogy. with the first two books being the first book, and I'm not comparing myself to these authors. These authors are next level. But in terms of the story and the content itself, I look at the first book in this trilogy as being the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. That book paints the picture of what it was like growing up as a person of color in this country, you know, in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So it kind of takes you through that whole spectrum, from the level of the streets right on up to higher politics.
One of my favorite books.
I just read the book again for like the 5th or 6th time.
Yeah.
And I realized that wherever I'm at in my life with that book, whenever I read it, I get something different from it.
Right.
All the time,
so I was able to.
we pick up a book. I mean, we've read once or twice. You see a different side. You get something else out of the book. So I mean, I love reading.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
Several times.
So with Malcolm X is first. Then there's a book called Makes Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall. That book was written about Mr. McCall's experience growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you know, and it takes you through this very similar lens and point of view as Malcolm X's book, from the streets to a struggle to improve yourself and kind of come up into higher society, so to speak, and integrate and have to do those things. So very similar stories. And then I look at my story coming from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. So I kind of look at it as a spectrum of continuation with a very similar storyline, but you can kind of see the cultural similarities that have taken place in all three of those books during those time frames, and also the differences. And at the end of the day, there's way more similarities than there are differences. Which means that from a cultural standpoint, we've been pretty consistent, and that's usually what happens with culture. And unfortunately, from a political standpoint, not much has changed either, which is why I look at it that way. So I really look at this book as being a trilogy of those two other books. Again, I'm not saying it from the perspective and the point of view of the writing styles. Nathan McCall is the concept. Nathan McCall is a professor of literature, and he teaches this. And Alex Haley is Alex Haley. He wrote Roots, and you know, I am not on that level. This is not just me being humble. This is me recognizing what they do compared to what I do. At least not yet. Maybe if I continue on, maybe I could reach there one day. But it's the storyline. So I look at it as being a trilogy. And if you really want a good feel for what it's felt like to be Black in this country growing up, the way that we all grew up in terms of, you know, impoverished neighborhoods and the struggle to come up, then those are the three books that I suggest that you read in order. Actually, no, you know what? Read my book first, because that way, not being selfish, but that way you'll hold me to a little lesser standard when you read theirs, you know, so.
I was going to say that what I enjoyed about the book is that it made me go back to like my childhood. When you were talking about the dancing and the music, and y'all were on 42nd Street breakdancing and all that kind of stuff. I was like, it just brought back so many memories. But I think that your book, the rebranding and everything now, is perfect, because the climate that we in now is conducive to that. You know what I'm saying? Like, people are so receptive to want to change that they'll be more open-minded to hearing something that's called White Nigger, even though you're changing the title. But the meat of the book is still that. You know what I'm saying? So I think that now, you know, because controversy ignites change.
That's true.
You know, so that's what we want to happen. So I think it's a perfect time for it now.
Right? And you know, the irony is that with this title, so I've sat down with these various school districts and you know, talked to the tops of the school district superintendents on down, and they're all like, yeah, this book is great, but you know, it's the name. And I said, well, imagine, and a lot of these superintendents were white. So I said, imagine if that name makes you uncomfortable. Imagine how people that are considered to be that, or have called that their entire lives, imagine how uncomfortable they feel from being associated with that. And then like, wow, I didn't think about that. And I said, this is the whole irony of this situation. You know, there's something that you think is positive and that could potentially help to impact change, but you're not willing to push it ahead. And this is not a knock on them. I totally understand it. I get it. But they're not willing to push it ahead because of the name that's associated with it. And, oh no, people are going to judge it. And one of my marketing points was never judge a book by its cover.
Right.
If you see those two words together, it depends on who you ask. People have a different perspective of what that means. Most of the people of color coming from where we come from immediately get it. They understand immediately. Whereas somebody that grew up maybe in rural America might take that word as being somebody that's called a wigger, for instance. So somebody that's white, but they act Black. So it depends on your perspective and where you come from, what the title means to you. But at the end of the day, I just wanted I found two words that are basically polar opposites. And when you look at them on a piece of paper, you immediately see the opposites. And to put them together, I wanted you to understand immediately in just two words how I felt growing up. And I think that those two words it was perfect. They came together perfectly.
This actually leads to my question that I have for you. Now, of course, I know writing this book could be therapeutic, must have been therapeutic. Definitely had to dredge up some old emotions, because you really paint a clear picture of growing up in a white neighborhood, white schools, being called nigger. Then that completely, like you mentioned, polar opposite. Now being thrusted into this urban school, and now you call the white boy. And so my question to you is, how was the way that you were perceived by others as a child affected you in terms of your identity as Jason today? How did it affect you as an adult?
Early on, and I talked about this in the book, I felt like it was a disadvantage because I always felt like I had to fight all the time for recognition of who I was, for standing. And as I interviewed people for the book, I realized that it was less about me being biracial and more about me being light-skinned, and how light skin and dark skin play into the Black community. When I was growing up during that time in the early 70s and the 80s, light-skinned brothers were winning. You know, we were winning. If you had the nice hair and you were light-skinned, we were on top of the world. And we've seen shifts now. You know, you went from that phase to darker skinned brothers winning, and exactly. So but at that time that was the case. So it was a disadvantage. I felt like it was a disadvantage when I was growing up. But as I got older and I moved into more professional settings, I saw that I started to recognize some of the advantages that I had. And the advantages were based on cultural understandings and level of comfort, where I was able to, I talk about this, where I'm meeting with a client when I was doing management and entertainment on a corner in the projects in the South Bronx. And I'm 100% comfortable in that setting. I know what's going on around me. I'm on a pivot. I can see things coming. I understand what's going on. I know that they're selling crack over there. They're selling heroin over there. I know that I know what's going on. I got the lay of the land. But I have that meeting with that client. Then I get in the car and I drive downtown to Manhattan, and I go into a meeting with 4 white executives who are sitting there in suits and ties. And I'm able to articulate and relate to them as well. And probably more importantly, I'm able to make them feel comfortable with me. And then I'm able to take what my client is trying to do and act as the kind of like the translator between these two cultures and bring them together and bring them to the table. So as I got older, it was definitely something that worked in my advantage. I'm assuming that Barack Obama had similar experiences, and he talked about some of these as well. His ability to kind of bridge those two cultures because he understands them both extremely well. Which is an advantage it's a huge advantage that I have at this stage of my life. I wish that I would have had more experiences with more cultures younger, and then I would have been even more effective in communicating to a wider range of people. So it was definitely, when I was younger, I thought it was a disadvantage, but I see now that it was a huge advantage that I've had. Growing up, painful. It was painful.
Of course.
Right, Jason, because you were beating people up left and right.
Hello.
Well, they were beating me up too.
Jason.
I I was like, Jason, a little Mike Tyson here. What's going on?
Listen,
Yeah.
and let's trust me. I got it handed to me plenty of times as well. But you know, sometimes I got the better as well. But yeah, I had to fight. I didn't. It was either fight or get run over.
Yeah.
So eventually, you know, I had to do it. I don't think I'm confrontational by nature.
No.
I prefer, especially at this stage of my life. But even as I reflect now and look back on it, I see that I didn't really embrace confrontation. And from that point of view, you talked about being therapeutic as well. You mentioned that before.
Yes, yes.
This was extremely therapeutic for me, unbelievably so. I was forced to go back and look at things that I didn't look at before. I was forced to address things and feelings and emotions that I had bottled up inside of me for all these years. But now that I'm an adult and I look back, I can see that, you know what, this is crazy. This happened when I was a kid. The person that I was involved with at the time was a kid too. We were acting as kids do. You know, for me to still hold a grudge all this time is just ridiculous. So it enabled me to let a lot of things go, and enabled me to really start the process of healing myself as well. So from that perspective, it was extremely therapeutic.
And how was that for your mom as growing up raising, you know, you have two other siblings, right?
Yeah, so I have a younger sister, and well, actually, I have more siblings than that. But from my mother, I have two other
Okay.
siblings. So my younger sister, and my younger brother. My younger brother was actually he was killed 2 days before September 11th. Actually, yesterday
Oh,
was
I'm
his
so
birthday.
sorry.
It would have been his birthday.
Is it
Um,
Calvin?
so yes, yes.
Wow.
So I don't mean to ruin parts of the book for anybody that didn't read it yet, but he was killed. But from my mother's perspective, the biggest thing that I was worried about from when I wrote this book was I'm putting stuff out there that I saw her go through. The abuse, when I'm talking about the abuse and those things, that was very painful for me to witness and write about. But the biggest thing I was concerned about was how my mother was going to react to that, because that's her life too, and I'm putting it out there for everybody to see. So the first time I gave her the finished copy of the book, and I waited to the very last minute because I was so nervous. I didn't know how she was going to respond to it, and if she would have said, "I'm not comfortable with this," then I don't know what I would have done. If I would have just not put the book out or had to change it, I don't know. But I felt like that part of the book was so powerful that it's one for me. I think it's one of the best parts, the more emotionally in tune parts of the book. But she read it and she immediately said, "Well, the way you write about it, it wasn't that bad. It was,
Yeah, it wasn't.
it wasn't as as aggressive and as harsh as the way you saw it." And I said, well, Mom, you have to understand, I'm looking at this through the eyes of a 5 and a 6 and a 7-year-old. So, and this made me realize that when you raise your voice to a child that age, it's like a monster yelling at you, like there's this huge person. And you think about when you're growing up that everything seems so big, everything seems so huge. Like I went back to the street that I grew up on in Elmira, and there's only like 15 houses on the whole street. It's such a small block. But when I was growing up, it felt like it was huge.
Yeah.
It felt like it was a mile long. Or it's houses that you're in where you look at this hallway that you think is extra long, and then when as an adult you're like, I can barely fit down this hallway. It's perception. It's how you view these things. So I think that was part of it. The part of it was that I was writing from the perspective of being a child, and that's how I remembered it as a child. I didn't want to write it. I didn't want to downplay it by the emotions and what I know now. I wanted it to feel like it felt in that moment. And then the other thing is when you've been a victim of violence for so long, especially domestic violence, the victim also tends to play the situation as well and make excuses and say that, oh, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Oh, well, he just hit me once or twice. So those are things that come up as well. So I think it was those two things coming together that she was right and I was right, and that was kind of where we came. But that was the one comment that she had. Than that, she was unbelievably proud. She was the first person that was promoting the book for me. You know, my son's book is out and it's phenomenal and this and that. So that right there really gave me a lot of relief, and made me much more comfortable going out there to promote the book and to talk about what was going on with her as well as myself.
Right. That's awesome.
So what would the older Jason tell the younger Jason?
Probably not much that the older Jason could have told the younger Jason.
The Jason now, the Jason sitting right in front of me. What advice would
Yeah,
you
me right now talking to so
mm-hmm.
it would have had to been more than just advice. It would have had to been the younger me being able to witness how I moved now, who I am and how I moved for a consistent amount of time. Because a one-on-one conversation, it can be impactful and it can change someone's life. But when you're dealing with somebody as, well, when I was younger, they called it being stubborn. They called it being hard-headed. Now they call it persistence. They call it drive, ambition. But at that time, I was stubborn. I was hard-headed, and I was going to do what I was going to do. I needed to see something consistently over a period of time to make me believe what the person was saying. And for me, I needed to see it with my own eyes. You have to set an example, and it's not about necessarily your words. It's more about your actions. And as I've gotten older, I used to work in a program. One of the very first, it might have been my very first book event that I did. I went back to Rochester. There was a community center right across the street from, like, kitty corner from where I went to high school and where I did a lot of my dirt and drinking and all the stuff that I talked about in the book. I went back to this community center. A friend of mine was running the center now, and I was talking about the book, and it was all youth. There's a youth empowerment program there that's doing great things for youth in the community. Rochester is one of the top three, or I should say bottom three, in terms of childhood poverty in the country.
Yeah.
I think they're ranked number 3 or number 2 now. They might even be number 1. So it's a very poor place to grow up, especially for children. But I went back there and I was talking and I'm engaging with the youth. And then I saw somebody walk in, a young lady that was in a program when I was working in for a nonprofit organization there. And I was working with kids in the community. And she came in and she was crying and she said, I hope that you all know how lucky you are. This man changed my life. And she said, I wanted to tell you I love you, and I never told you that before, but whenever I got lost in life, I would look to see what you were doing. And whatever you did, I followed that. So she's in the process now of getting her PhD. She got a master's degree in social work. Like she mirrored what I was doing in terms of education and pursuing that. And whenever she got lost, she would just look at that and she followed that. I never knew that was taking place. I had no idea that was taking place. I never knew that I had that type of impact on her until she told me that day. So I think that, if we're moving like people are watching us and we want to set example, it's not necessarily what we say, it's how we move and what we do that's more important. So the younger me would have needed to have people like me around him for a longer period of time and on a consistent basis in order to effectuate that change. Now that's not for everybody. Sometimes one conversation can spark the desire to change. But for me personally, I would have needed to see that. And that's why it's important that we go back into our communities and we provide that and we give it to them. And we put our experiences out there and let people know that this is what I'm doing. And more importantly, this is how I got here, because people don't, a lot of people, everybody in our neighborhoods knows how to become a home health aide. Everybody knows that because that's just a lot of people that do that, or they know how to get a job working in maintenance at such and such because so many people have done that. But not many people know how to become a teacher, or not many people know how to become an attorney, or not many people know how to become a doctor. So for us to be able to show them that it's doable and to give that back, I think is essential.
Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah. Yeah, that's why you always have to walk around with integrity and honor, even when nobody's watching. You don't think anybody's watching because somebody's watching.
Somebody's always watching.
Like how the lady was. Well, I thought this was an awesome, great conversation. Do you ladies have any more questions for Jason?
No, I just think you were a breath of fresh air with all your knowledge and all the wealth of information that you provided us today. I'm sure it'll inspire an audience member. It'll open someone's mind.
I realize that I've got people have contacted me from all over the world about, I read your book. I had a couple of people early on who said, that you are the voice. You are the voice for biracial people now. You're our leader. And I'm like, no, I don't listen. I'm not signing up to be anybody's leader. That's not what I'm trying to do. No, it's your story. You're speaking for us. We're looking. We appreciate that. And I got those phone calls from all over the world, and those messages from people, biracial people in Japan, from Brazil, from everywhere. It was crazy that people are saying, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one that was going through this and that experienced this." And a lot of it had to do with colorism, and the fact that they were light skinned and growing up in darker communities or vice versa. So a lot of it had to do with that, but also the whole biracial part as well. And everyone's thinking that they're alone. And we all think we're alone when we're growing up. When we're young, we think that there's no one else that like us.
Right.
And going through what we're going through. So that was huge. So I think that what you're doing, reading those books, is so important, because they're going to be able to connect and understand that they are not alone out there, that there are other people that are going through the same type of things and feeling the same type of way. And that's so, so important. So
Jason,
I commend
before
you
you
for that.
leave us, please tell us your where they can reach you and where they can order the book at again before you leave.
Sure. The book can be ordered at Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You can go to my website, jasonbost.com. Instagram is author Jason Bost, at author Jason Bost. My other website for my law practice is jasonbostlaw.com, which highlights my entertainment practice. And then my law firm's website, and my law firm does primarily real estate and probate matters, surrogate court work as well. It's focusedlaw.com, FOCUSED law.com.
And we'll put a link down in the description so people can go and order your book.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And I'm looking forward to hearing more feedback from you. I haven't talked about the book in so long. It's good to talk about it again and see that there's still interest there.
Thank you, Jason.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, ladies.
Okay, have a good one. Enjoy that game.
On Super Bowl Sunday.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
All right.
Bye, Jason.
Bye. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.
So, ladies, what you think? That was awesome, huh?
Yeah, it was really good.
I think that leads to a deeper, in-depth conversation on colorism, like the dark skin. Because when Jackie said that dark skin Latino Puerto Ricans and light skin Puerto Ricans, I'm like, oh,
there's a lot.
Other races don't think that other races deal with that type of stuff, and you guys do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, ladies.
This was a good topic, ladies.
It was. He was awesome. He was so forthcoming.
Oh my God, yes, he was amazing.
Next time on
To Puerto Ricans and
Black Gurl.